Hi class. This week we're going to be talking about war and violence, taking some of the moral theories that we covered from the first part of class and applying them to issues of violence and specifically war. We did this with wealth and distribution. You know, you had a deontological argument from Hospers and a utilitarian argument from Nielsen. I gave you a virtue argument on Thursday from the Christian tradition. So we're going to do some similar things with just war so that you can see how moral arguments are made. Again, when you leave this class, I want you to understand various moral theories, ways of making moral arguments, ways of justifying moral decisions, ways to make decisions that are consistent using basic criteria like consequences, moral principles, virtues. So I want you to be able to do that, and I also want you to be able to apply them to specific situations. When you're looking at wealth and distribution, you can make a moral argument, you can justify it using the kinds of theories and logic that we've been covering. So as we approach war and violence, you've basically got a few options. You've got an option that suggests that war can be justified for almost any reason, right? Whether you want resources or land for political gain. That's very difficult to justify ethically, if not impossible. The other option is something like just war theory. Only some wars are moral, those that can pass certain criteria, so some version of just war theory. And again, all just war theories have a list of criteria that will help us say these wars don't meet the criteria, they're unjust. These wars do meet the criteria, they're just. The other option is something like pacifism, or at least anti-war pacifism. But other than that, it's tough. What are the other options, right? It's either that war is justified for almost any reason, war is only justified under certain criteria, we call that just war theory, or war is never justified and we remain sort of anti-war pacifists. We're going to start for the next couple of lectures talking about just war theory. And I'm going to say a couple of things. One, if you want to be violent, both in your individual life or globally with military violence, the burden of proof is on that person or group who chooses to be violent. The burden of proof, this is an important concept, right, for this discussion, but for many others as well. The idea is that if there's not a good reason to go to war, the assumption is that war is unjust. The burden of proof is on those who want to instigate violence to say, why is this a just war? Why is this moral? And the reason is that we know violence, war, these are bad things. No one likes them. We wish they didn't exist. On the surface, they are immoral and wrong, and we'd like to avoid them altogether. However, in the world we live in, many argue there are times when violence is necessary. But since on the surface we think violence is a bad thing, death is a bad thing, the burden of proof is on those that say, yes, that is true, but in these situations, it becomes necessary. And in fact, is justified, right? So then the question becomes, under what conditions are wars justified? Under what criteria can they be justified? That's where we get just war theory. There's a lot of different versions of just war theory. For this particular lecture, I'm just going to give you sort of a generic version, a run-of-the-mill, very common version of just war theory. I think it's probably applicable to like 80% of them, right? That they would look something like this. Although some, again, differ here and there. Just war theory always has two components. Just cause, meaning before you go to war, is there just cause to go to war? What criteria fall under that, right? So just cause is one. Just means is the other. And that is, once we're actually at war, how should we behave? How should we govern ourselves to make sure that the war remains moral, remains just? So just cause is before making the decision. Just means is during battle. So we'll start with just cause. We've got about 5 criteria here. Again, a war is not just unless it meets all of these criteria. okay? So the first one is a war must confront a real and certain danger. There must be substantial aggression. Now, in the past, war could only be justified if, in fact, you had been attacked or an innocent third party had been attacked. So there was already violence, and then you're justified in getting involved to sort of lead to peace, right, to stop that violence. So either we've been directly attacked like Pearl Harbor, that's violence against us, and then we go and attack Japan to end World War II, or there needs to be an innocent third party, like in Iraq War I, when Iraq was going into Kuwait and attacking its neighbor. The idea is that, well, we're justified in protecting that innocent third party, Kuwait. But there was actual violence taking place in both of those examples I just gave you. Over time, though, just war theory has adapted and changed. Now, you don't have to wait until there's actual violence. If there's a real and certain danger, you're allowed to attack first. The reason that this changes is that warfare has changed, right? Now, if you wait until there's actual violence done to you or to an innocent third party, it might be too late. It could be an atomic weapon. It could be a biological weapon, and millions of people could be dead before you're even able to engage. So if you know there's a real and certain danger, you can strike first. Again, it can't be speculation, and it can't be a hunch. It can't be, well, maybe they've got the capability. It has to be real and certain. An example might be the United States decides to go to war with Iraq, and we begin to move our aircraft carriers into place. We begin to take our land troops and start to take them around the border of Iraq, and it becomes clear that war is imminent. Iraq doesn't have to wait for the American troops to cross the border or to have planes fly over dropping bombs. Once it becomes real and certain danger, they can attack first, right? You can apply this to individual lives, right? Like if you were in high school and you get challenged to a fight at lunch, and pretty soon everyone's circling up saying, fight, 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 you know, you and this other person, and it's clear that the fight's going to happen and there's no way to get out of it. There's a real and certain danger. You can punch first at that point, right? But you couldn't think to yourself, that guy might want to fight me someday, and go punch him in the back of the head. That's not a real and certain danger. So it's the same thing with a just cause. There either has to be actual violence or real and certain danger. Now, if that's the case, right, and we've checked that off the list, then we jump down to the next. Okay, now that we have a real and certain danger, we also have to have right intentions. And there's not very many of these, only a few. Right intentions for just war theory include protect innocent lives, self-defense, secure human rights. So we can say, well, if Iraq is attacking Kuwait and Kuwait's innocent in this situation, we need to protect the innocent. So we have good intentions. If that's really why we're doing it, that's good intentions. Or to protect their human rights. Or in Pearl Harbor when we're attacked, to protect our own citizens in self-defense. These are all right intentions. Things that include wrong intentions. This will help us with financially, with land, with oil, right? It will give us the upper hand in the Middle East or something. It cannot be self-serving. Those are wrong intentions, even if you have a real and certain danger, but your intentions are selfish. The war is unjust. You have to have a real and certain danger and have right intentions. The third is legitimate authority, that war, if it's to be justified, has to be commanded by legitimate authority. Initially, this was the monarch, right? You had to have a king, a magistrate of some kind, an emperor who can say yes to this war and put a stamp on it. Now, it might be things like presidents, dictators potentially, other leaders of countries, right? We're going to command the military to go into war. In the past, this was really a really big deal, and it was held to pretty strictly, right? Because you don't want to allow people to sort of wage violence on their own, to have rogues or renegade forces. It increases the amount of violence, but it's unsanctioned. The idea is that leadership is going to keep the country accountable, and that multiple voices will be in play, and that you won't have as many unjust wars. Lately, though, just war theory has shifted some, and this has been called into question, at least at times. For instance, like in Syria, there was this horrible dictator, and rebel forces want to overthrow him. But the rebel forces don't constitute a legitimate authority, so is it unjust for them? And many people say, no, it is not. They're protecting our human rights. They're being killed systematically. Their rights are stripped from them. And so we need to allow for that kind of internal revolution, even though there's not proper authority. So this is definitely in question now. It's best to have legitimate authority, but some would suggest it's not necessary. If there's a real uncertain danger and you have right intention and we've got a legitimate authority, assuming that we agree to that criteria, the next question is there a chance that we can succeed? If all the other boxes are checked, but you have no chance of winning, like 0 chance, right? Then you should not fight. In fact, you should surrender because you save lives overall. To engage in battle in a war you can't win only increases the death toll senselessly because you can't succeed. So it would be better to reduce the death toll and surrender knowing that you're going to lose anyway, right? So you have to have some reasonable probability of success. In Iraq War I, when the United States went in, there's I have these very famous images in my brain of Iraqi soldiers surrendering to news cameras and news crews. They didn't know if they were military or not, but the idea was we can't win. Now that the United States has invaded and they're going to sort of keep us from harming Kuwait and whatnot, we can't possibly win, so we need to surrender. And the idea is there was no probability of success, so that would have been the right thing to do. And then finally, after you've got real uncertain danger, right intention, legitimate authority, a chance of success, is this a last resort, right? Is this something that we've done all we can? We've used diplomatic means. We've gone to the UN. We've tried to sanction someone or hurt them financially with trade embargoes. We've done all we can to negotiate. And in the end, we say war is the only alternative. The idea is that any war that's undertaken right away or when it's not the last resort is unjust. Now again, we have to use some common sense here. It's have you taken every reasonable step? It can always be argued that this is not the last resort. You didn't try X, Y, and Z. But the idea is, can you show a reasonable amount of effort to use diplomatic, non-lethal means first? And if you've done a reasonable job of going through those attempts, then the war can be justified. So all these must be met, right, for you to have just cause. And this is all on the front end, before you engage, okay? One of the things that I'm going to ask you to respond to is, looking at these criteria, are they more utilitarian or deontological? And they might be both. But I'm going to want you to explain that, right? So the idea that you have to wait for there to be a real uncertain danger, is that more utilitarian or is that more deontological? Right intentions, right? Utilitarian or deontological? And then, of course, why do you think that? I want you to use the utilitarian and deontological logic because those two theories combined essentially make up the just war theory that we're covering. These criteria are one of those and sometimes both of those. So I want you to think through that. And I want you to see that logic coming through. It's sort of a marriage, saying that we want to hold you to utilitarian standards and we want to hold you to deontological standards before you go to war. The next set is just means, right? And this means, okay, now that we're at war, how do we handle ourselves, right? How do we conduct ourselves? The first criteria is you cannot intentionally harm or kill non-combatants, civilians, innocents. You cannot target them. Now, in the past, this criteria was much more strict. It was that you could not kill civilians, right? Because in the past, it was a lot easier to know who were the combatants and who were the civilians, right? You picture Braveheart. two armies march to a battlefield and they fight each other. There's no civilians there. There's no non-combatants. It's straightforward. Or the Civil War, you go onto a battlefield with your muskets. It's no innocence there. It's very straightforward. So it's easy to not kill innocents. In the past it was. But now, the kinds of wars we fight are almost impossible that, I mean, some innocents will die. In the fight on terrorism, terrorists and civilians look identical. They use humans as shields. So the criteria has been reduced from you cannot kill innocents to you cannot intend to kill innocents. But civilians or non-combatants or innocents can die as a foreseeable but unintended consequence. Okay? So we need to take out this electrical plant in order to shut down the army of our opponents to win the war. We don't intend to kill civilians. We're intending to take out this sort of army energy plant. But we know that bombs don't always hit their mark. We know there might be civilians there. And so some might die in our attempt to do this. But we don't intend to kill innocents. That's not what we want to do, right? And that's okay. We know that in war, innocents will die. And we know that they'll die sometimes because hospitals don't have electricity or the water gets contaminated because of the violence or the explosions or other things. But as long as that's not the intent, then just war theory says that's okay. Again, a very different thing as warfare has sort of changed over time. The second just means is proportionality. You can only use the amount of violence necessary to accomplish your goals. So when the United States goes into Iraq, it would not be just to drop an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb on Iraq to win the war, because it wasn't necessary to accomplish the goals. We could use a lot less force, kill a lot less innocents, and still get the same job done. So you've got to minimize the damage so that it is proportional to the goals intended, right? So both of these are important. Now, many people bring up, I mean, I usually ask, like, when's the last just war? That's something I might ask you at some point. Has there been a just war in recent memory, in recent history? And most people point to World War II. And I think with the United States, you could argue that all of the criteria of just cause have been met. We were attacked at Pearl Harbor, so there was substantial aggression, and the intention to defend ourselves, self-defense and human rights is met. It was ordered by legitimate authority, Congress and the President. We obviously had a probability of success because we were able to win. And the argument could be made, given the world climate and what was happening in France and Germany and other places, that this was a last resort. However, when we dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we violated this principle of discrimination. We targeted cities, we targeted civilian populations, and we killed hundreds of thousands of non-combatants intentionally. And that violated just means. Instead, just war theory would have said, no, you've got to go, get into a ground war, do what you have to do air raids, minimize the damage, target the military and combatants, but you can't just drop an atomic bomb on a city to end the war. You know, others say, well, we ended the war right then. We saved lives overall and money and time and everything else. We were just able to, that's it. But you used more force than you needed to get your goals done, and you targeted innocents. So that's unacceptable according to just war theory. So again, that's a very close, I mean, that comes close to meeting the criteria for just war. I don't think it was altogether unjust, but certainly there might have been elements that we say didn't meet this criteria. I'm curious about a couple of things. One, again, think about where do these criteria come from? Are they mostly utilitarian? Are they mostly deontological? Are they some of both, and why? I'm interested in having you think about what was the last just war, and why do you think it was just? And it might not have been fought by the United States, maybe it was fought by 2 other countries. And I want you to think about the criteria as a whole. What do you think of these criteria? Are they too strict? Are the criteria too lenient? Should there be others added that aren't here? Are you thinking of things that, you know what, maybe we should add 1 or 2, right? So this is something that, again, I want you to think about as we move forward. I hope this helps, and if you have any questions at all, please let me know.